Canada keeps having the same argument. Immigration is ruining the country. No, immigration is saving the country. Okay, but why is everything falling apart? Canada used to pride itself on welcoming newcomers. Now, housing is insane, healthcare is breaking, and people are furious. Canada is in trouble. But blaming immigrants is like blaming the smoke instead of the fire. If you think immigration is ruining Canada, or that any criticism is just racist fear-mongering, you're both missing the real story. Because the system is broken, just not in the way you've been told. And by the end of this video, you'll see who actually broke it. The cracks were already there. The crisis didn't start when immigration numbers went up. Canada was already breaking. For decades, housing policy, red tape, and profit-driven development meant we weren't building enough homes. In cities like Toronto and Vancouver, wages crawled while rent went vertical. Entire generations were told to just buy a house, while investors were buying 5. Waiting lists exploded. Rent surged. Cities grew on paper, but the number of actual homes didn't. At the same time, healthcare was already stretched thin. Not enough family doctors. Residency spots barely moved. ERs were overflowing long before most people even started talking about record immigration levels. So when the federal government ramped up immigration without fixing housing, healthcare, or planning, all of those cracks started to split wide open. The surge in immigration did put pressure on a fragile system. If you're struggling with rent, can't find a doctor, or feel like everything got worse really fast, you're not imagining it. You're feeling the impact of more people being pushed into a system that was never properly prepared. When people say everything broke when immigrants arrived, they're taking a real frustration and aiming it at the wrong target. The cracks were already there. The surge didn't create them. It just made them impossible to ignore. From strategic to unplanned. For years, Canada used immigration like a tool. Specific skills, specific regions, people who were meant to settle long-term, point system, family reunification, refugees. Imperfect, sure, but at least there was a plan. Match newcomers to actual economic needs and help them build a life here. Then, in recent years, something shifted. Instead of mainly bringing in engineers, healthcare workers, and skilled trades, Canada started massively expanding 2 groups. Temporary foreign workers, not just to fill real labor shortages, but to fill the cheapest, most disposable jobs. And international students, not because universities were starving for talent, but because governments defunded education and colleges realized they could treat foreign students like walking revenue. So we moved away from come build a life here to come study, come work, then maybe leave, but make us money while you're here. Less about long-term integration, more about short-term labor supply and cash flow. And that shift didn't come out of nowhere. It was driven by corporate lobbying and governments looking for budget band-aids. This wasn't some noble expansion of welcoming newcomers. It was, we don't want to raise taxes on corporations or the wealthy. So let's quietly plug the gaps with international tuition and cheap labor. So yes, the surge had an impact, but the way it was done, rushed, short-sighted, profit-driven, is what turned existing cracks into a full-on fracture. Canada actually needs immigrants. Canada needs immigrants. It always has. It always will. Canada has one of the fastest aging populations in the OECD. More retirees, fewer workers paying taxes, plus more people drawing pensions and using healthcare. Equals the math stops working. Unless you bring in more people. It's basic demographic math. Without newcomers, Canada literally cannot sustain its economy or its social programs. But Canada doesn't just need more people. It needs the right people in the right places with the right support. We don't need more international students crammed into tiny basements in Toronto. While construction sites across the country are desperate for trades, we don't need more people serving coffee in oversaturated downtowns. While rural hospitals can't find nurses and family doctors, we need construction workers to build homes. So we need nurses, doctors, and healthcare staff across the provinces actually facing shortages. We need engineers and skilled trades where infrastructure is crumbling, not just where rent is highest. And here's what a lot of people forget. Canada has handled big immigration waves before. Successfully. Post-World War II, hundreds of thousands of immigrants arrived. and housing, infrastructure, and the economy were growing along with them. Immigration worked because the country planned for it. Immigration doesn't break a country. Bad planning does. Wasted talent, credential recognition crisis. Here's where this goes from bad planning to what are we even doing? Canada is literally begging for doctors and nurses while making immigrant doctors drive Uber. Behind every visa is a human life. Someone who left behind family, community, status, credentials, their whole identity, because they were told, Canada needs you. Imagine this. You arrive in Canada as a trained doctor or nurse. You've spent a decade in school. You've treated real patients. You're ready to help in a country that says it's desperate for healthcare workers. And then you find out the system has no place for you. Your education doesn't count. Your credentials don't transfer. You're good enough to be counted in the immigration numbers, but not good enough to be allowed to do the job you were invited for. More than 6.5 million people in Canada don't have access to a family doctor. ERs are overflowing. Clinics are closing. Meanwhile, Canada has thousands of trained physicians from abroad who aren't allowed to practice. In 2023, only about 34% of international medical graduates who applied for family medicine residency actually got in. For Canadian-trained grads, that number was closer to 98%. So what happens to everyone else? They take whatever job they can find, often in lower-skilled, lower-paid work. Think about that contradiction for a second. We blame immigrants for putting pressure on the healthcare system. But we have thousands of qualified healthcare workers already here, ready to help, begging to work in their field, and we're forcing them to drive Ubers instead. Yes, of course we need high standards. No one is saying, just rubber stamp every credential. But there's a huge difference between let's rigorously verify your skills and let's make the process so expensive, so slow, so confusing, and so competitive that almost no one can get through, no matter how qualified they are. We need a different balance. High standards to keep patients safe, absolutely. But not standards so rigid and protectionist that we throw away the exact talent we keep insisting we don't have. Because at that point, it's not just a bureaucratic issue, it's a moral failure and an economic one. The brain drain, losing the talent we begged to come. Here's the bitter irony. Canada spends years and billions marketing itself as a magnet for talent, then designs a system that makes sure a lot of that talent never actually gets used, or even stays. The Institute for Canadian Citizenship put out a report called The Leaky Bucket 2025. They followed what happens to the skilled immigrants Canada works so hard to attract. The results are brutal. 1 in 5 immigrants leaves Canada within 25 years, and most leave within the first 5 years of arriving. Highly educated immigrants are about twice as likely to leave as those with lower skills. In other words, the exact people Canada brags about attracting, the best and brightest, are the ones most likely to look around and say, yeah, I'm out. And in healthcare, where the crisis is loudest, the numbers are staggering. For healthcare workers specifically, about 36% left Canada within 5 years. Think about that. Over a third of the trained healthcare workers who actually came here walked away. Canada has a retention problem. We bring people in, but we don't build a system that lets them belong, contribute, or live anything close to the life they were promised. So when people say immigrants are ruining Canada, they're missing the real scandal. Canada is ruining its high-skilled immigrants and then watching them leave. The scapegoat and why people punch down. Now everything is cracking at the same time. Rents are insane. Groceries are a small nightmare every week. Wages haven't moved in years. And people are not just concerned. They're exhausted, they're angry, they're scared. So what happens when a government lets things fall apart? The same thing that always happens. They find a scapegoat. Instead of looking at the people who've been in power for decades, they tell you the problem is the people who arrived last. But here's the thing. Immigration didn't break housing. Developers did, with speculation, land hoarding, and building for investors instead of residents. Immigration didn't break healthcare. Decades of underfunding, staff burnout, and refusal to expand capacity did. Immigration didn't stagnate wages. Corporate profit chasing did. Companies kept wages flat, while profits and executive pay went vertical. Yet when the pressure hits ordinary people, It's way easier to point at your stressed out neighbor with an accent than at a faceless corporation or a politician who's been in office for 20 years. Because if the problem is immigrants, you don't have to regulate developers. You don't have to tax windfall profits. So when systems start to collapse, fear goes up. When fear goes up, resentment goes up. And resentment always needs a target. Look at the U.S. ICE raids tearing families apart, kids separated from their parents, and people who applaud the cruelty. Are they all evil? Probably not. They're angry. They feel abandoned by their own systems. They've watched their jobs disappear, costs go up while their pay stays flat. Then someone comes along and hands them a story. Your life is hard because of immigrants. Your community is changing because of them. Your problems have a face, and it looks like that person over there. It's simple, it's wrong, but it's emotionally satisfying. Canada is not immune to this. We're already seeing it. Rising xenophobia, anti-immigrant talking points going mainstream, politicians dog whistling, media amplifying outrage for clicks. People are hurting. They're scared about rent, about job security, about their kids' future. Pain makes people punch down when they've been trained their whole lives not to punch up. You've been told your entire life that the rich are job creators, that billionaires are aspirational. You're not taught to question them. You're taught to admire them. So when everything starts breaking, you blame the people below you or the people who just arrived beside you. And that dynamic, it's useful. Because as long as everyone at the bottom is busy tearing each other apart, the people at the top don't have to answer for anything. They can keep hoarding wealth, keep hiking rents, keep underfunding services, keep writing the rules in their own favor, while you argue with your neighbor about who deserves to be here. There's a line that sums it up perfectly. The only dangerous minority is the powerful, greedy, ultra-rich. If that makes you uncomfortable, good, it's supposed to. Discomfort is what happens right before you realize. You might have been aiming your anger at the wrong people. The bipartisan failure on housing. Here's the uncomfortable truth. This isn't about one political party ruining housing. Most zoning decisions happen at provincial and municipal levels, not federal. So yeah, you can yell at Ottawa all day, but the rules about what actually gets built, where, and for whom, are being made a lot closer to home. But here's what's worse. No matter who's in charge, the same people keep winning. Liberals promise affordability, then water down policies. Conservatives promise to cut red tape, then fast-track zoning changes that happen to benefit politically connected developers. Different colors on the campaign signs, same outcome on your rent. It's the same playbook everywhere. Talk about housing supply, do little to stop speculation. Let investors treat homes like casino chips. Allow zoning that favors big, expensive projects over affordable units. Then act shocked when people can't afford to live. Zooming out, it looks less like politics and more like a business model. A system where both major parties are terrified of upsetting the people who profit from high prices. Developers, landowners, investors, banks. This isn't blue versus red, it's money versus everyone else. And immigrants get dragged in as the distraction instead of the real culprits. So if you're angry about rent or locked out of the market, you're right to be angry. Just make sure it's aimed at the right target. Who's actually profiting? If you really want to know who's winning in this chaos, don't look at the newest Canadian. Look at where the serious money goes and who's really taking your jobs. Take Stellantis, the global automaker. The Canadian government gave Stellantis nearly $105 million to retool plants in Ontario. Combined with other subsidies, the total commitment was up to $15 billion in performance incentives. Taxpayer money, with the promise of keeping jobs and production in Canada. So what did Stellantis do? They took the money, then announced they were moving Jeep production from Brampton, Ontario to Illinois, while investing $13 billion in U.S. operations. So let's map this out. Canadian taxpayers fund a giant corporation. The corporation cashes the check. Then the jobs disappear anyway. But somehow in that story, immigrants are the ones taking jobs? The biggest job thieves wear suits, not name tags. They're the people in boardrooms, signing off on cost-cutting measures. When corporations lobby for temporary foreign workers instead of training local workers, that's not an immigration problem. It's profit maximization through labor exploitation. They're making sure workers, immigrant and non-immigrant, stay scared enough not to demand better. Here's the twist. It's a lot easier to yell at the person you see than the person you don't. You see the international student at the cash register. You see the refugee driving the delivery truck. You don't see the CEO in a boardroom signing off on shutting down your local plant. You don't see the minister in a backroom meeting approving subsidies with no real strings attached. But yelling at an invisible CEO is hard. Yelling at your own government requires organizing, voting, demanding change. You know what's easy? Yelling at the newcomer working a minimum wage job. Who has less power than anyone else in this equation? So we end up with this upside-down narrative where the people with the least power, immigrants trying to survive, sometimes overqualified and underpaid, are framed as the threat, and the people with the most power, the ones moving billions, writing the rules and cashing the subsidies, get called job creators. Follow the money, and the story changes fast. The problem isn't that immigrants are taking your job. The problem is that your job was turned into a line item on a balance sheet, and someone far away decided it was cheaper to erase it. And as long as we keep blaming the people at the bottom, the people at the top get to keep cashing in. Abuse of the system. Yes, some people abuse the system. There have been fraudulent college admissions, shady recruitment agencies, asylum claims used as a loophole, ghost consultants gaming paperwork and scamming hopeful newcomers. That exists. But here's the part that somehow always gets left out. These are the exceptions, not the majority. When wealthy Canadians hide money in offshore accounts to dodge taxes, we don't say, we need to rethink Canadians. We say, crack down on tax evasion, close the loopholes, enforce the law. So why is it that when a handful of bad actors exploit immigration programs, suddenly it becomes, immigrants are the problem? And we need to rethink immigration? Because that narrative is convenient. And because the system itself created a lot of these vulnerabilities. When government deregulated the education sector, private colleges didn't mysteriously appear. They popped up overnight to chase profit. When they opened massive immigration pathways, without building the housing, services, or enforcement capacity to match chaos, wasn't a surprise. It was the logical outcome. So, yes, close the loopholes, tighten oversight, crack down on fraud, but stop pretending immigrants caused those loopholes. If you really care about abuse, go after the people building and profiting from the loopholes, not the people desperate enough to walk through them. The human cost, when the rug gets pulled out. Here's what rarely shows up in the press conference charts. Imagine you're an international student. You come to Canada on promises. Promises from colleges, recruiters, government websites, ads saying, study here, work here, build a life here. You spend your savings. You take on debt. Your family pools money they don't have. You leave the only community you've ever known. You're told there's a path, study, work, permanent residency. Then, halfway through that journey, the rules change. Your PR application gets rejected. Your pathway closes. The categories are capped. You were told to come. Now, you're told to leave. On paper, it's just policy reform, or course correction, or managing targets. In real life, it's someone sitting on the floor of a basement apartment, staring at an email that just quietly erased their future. These are human beings, not numbers in a spreadsheet. The emotional and psychological cost of this is enormous. Uprooting your life, leaving your support system, betting everything on a promise you were given officially, and then having that promise yanked away. And this is happening right as Canada slams the brakes. Is some kind of correction necessary? Sure, but there's a difference between fixing a system and pulling the rug out from under people who already trusted it. If you're going to make big changes, you do it with clear communication, transitional rules, real protections for the people already here who made life-altering decisions based on what your government told them. Policy can change. It should change when things aren't working. But if you're going to invite people in, take their money, their labor, their youth, and then suddenly shut the door behind them, that's not responsible management. That's treating people like disposable commodities. So what's the actual solution? If Canada actually wants to fix this, we have to stop treating immigration as a number and start treating it as a strategy. Here's what that looks like in real life, not in a press release. Fix credential recognition immediately. British Columbia cut credential recognition times from months to just days for healthcare workers. And it worked. So we know this isn't impossible. It's a choice. A doctor shouldn't spend years driving Uber, while we have ERs closing from staff shortages. Streamline assessments, standardize the process across provinces, kill the pointless red tape. If someone is qualified to save lives, they shouldn't be trapped in paperwork purgatory. 2. Return to strategic immigration. Bring people where the economy actually needs them, not just where corporations want cheap labor. Housing crisis? Prioritize construction workers, electricians, plumbers, in regions that are actually building homes. Hospitals drowning? Nurses, doctors, personal support workers, where wait times are out of control. Engineers where infrastructure is crumbling. Tech workers where there's genuine demand. 3. Boost public services from the ground up. You can't just pour people into a broken system and then blame them when it cracks. Increase residency spots for doctors. Fund more nursing and healthcare training. Expand transit, schools, and healthcare capacity. Build affordable housing first. Immigration isn't a problem when it's paired with real investment. 4. Strengthen oversight. Clamp down on bad actors. Regulate colleges and recruiters like it actually matters. Shut down predatory private schools that exist to extract tuition, not educate. Ban shady consultants who ghost students once they land. And clamp down hard on exploitative employers who rely on temporary workers to avoid training and paying people properly. If your business model only works when workers have no options, your business model is the problem. 5. Hold corporations accountable. If a corporation takes public money, it should deliver public value. Period. If they break commitments, like Stellantis did, there should be consequences. Clawbacks, penalties, restrictions on future subsidies. No more corporate welfare with zero strings attached, while workers and communities eat the fallout. 6. Address the housing crisis at the root. If immigration vanished tomorrow, you'd still have a housing crisis. Why? Because the core problem is not enough homes, too much speculation, and a system tilted toward investors, not residents. So, build housing, social, affordable, and market. Cut the fake red tape that exists mainly to protect existing land values. Immigration isn't the housing crisis. Developers protecting their profits are. Political cowardice is. What Canada needs most right now? Canada doesn't just have too many immigrants. Canada has too many immigrants brought in with no real strategy. We flooded the country with people for cheap labor and tuition dollars, not for the skills and sectors we actually needed. Too many low-wage, precarious jobs. Not enough doctors, nurses, builders, engineers. And when that lazy approach blows up, our politicians don't fix the systems. They manage public anger. They blame volumes. They hint at problem newcomers and quietly hope we don't notice who designed this mess in the first place. The truth is, Canada doesn't have a people problem. It has a systems problem. Immigrants didn't break Canada. They've been holding it together for decades. The real threat isn't the people arriving at the bottom. It's the powerful few at the top who profit when the rest of us turn on each other. The sooner we stop pointing sideways, the sooner we can actually fix this country for everyone who calls it home. If you've got a personal story, immigrant, worker, Canadian-born, about how these systems have hit your life, drop it in the comments. I'm reading them. If you want policy that prioritizes people over profit, hit subscribe. This isn't just a debate. This is our conversation and our fight for what Canada should be.